Hey y'all, and welcome back to the studio. And today I am settling the debate. Which one is better, store-bought or handmade watercolor? Now, as an artist, sometimes I get brought up this question: which one is better? Should I go with store-bought or should I go with handmade? Well, recently I got into watercolor painting and I decided I wanted to try out metallic watercolor. But of course the question got raised in my brain: which one is better? Is it better to go with a store-bought big name brand, or is it better if I go with a handmade? So today I am settling that debate. Which one is better? Please excuse my appearance. I have been sick this entire week. I have had stomach bug. My husband has COVID. Thankfully, our little one didn't get anything. Thank goodness. But we have both been sick, so please excuse my very tired, nasally appearance today because I am still trying to get over being sick. With that being said, let's talk about some of the pros and cons of buying handmade and buying professional store-bought grade. The first product that I'm going to talk about is store-bought. For most artists, we venture toward going with a store-bought name brand item because sometimes it's cheaper, sometimes it's a little bit better quality, and most of the time it's more convenient. And convenience is a big thing in this modern world. And so that's what I wanted to test today. I tested out Derwent's watercolor for this, and this is their travel size palette. Now, for this project, I wanted to try out metallic watercolor. I have been very interested in it for a very long time. I have seen other artists on Instagram using it, and it just looks so beautiful. It looks so pretty. It's very shiny. It's very pigmented. So I wanted to see, could I get those same results using a store-bought brand, or is it better to go with a handmade? So for this challenge, I gave myself a few criteria to focus on. For one, cost efficiency. Which one is more cost effective? Pigment, because if you're going to invest in a metallic watercolor, of course you want it to be highly pigmented. What is the sheen? Like, can I see all the metallic prettiness in it? Can I see all the shininess of a metallic watercolor? And of course, how does it fare against a professional grade watercolor? For this project, I decided to use Derwent, and then I picked a handmade watercolor company off of Etsy. So let's talk about Derwent real quick. I was actually not aware that Derwent made watercolor. I have Derwent colored pencils and I love them. They are very pigmented, they're fun and easy to work with, and they are very nice when I'm trying to blend. They're great for when I'm working in colored pencil, but I wasn't aware that they actually made supplies other than colored pencils. So imagine my surprise when I saw that Derwent actually made a metallic watercolor set. Now, when I purchased these, and I purchased them months ago, so cost-wise, these were $36.71, I want to say, and that was without tax and things like that. And my only issue with this set is it is tiny. It doesn't have a lot of colors. It has a paintbrush and it has a sponge for making sure your palette is clean, but the set is very small. It has very limited amount of colors. So that was one minus in the store-bought brand category. This was a brand, that I would naturally assume would have a few more colors. It would have some more things going with it, considering the price range as well, for only getting, I think, 10 colors total. So for me, it's a little bit of a disappointment. I'm gonna be honest, it's a little disappointing. All in all, I would rate price for this one about a 5 out of 10, honestly, because you're only getting 10 colors. It's $36. When I bought them, they were $36, and that was not including my tax or anything like that. I think it went up to $38 for a set of 10, so that kind of bumped their score down a little bit. So I'm gonna rate this a 5 out of 10 for price. Now let's talk Handmade. I bought a Handmade watercolor set from a shop on Etsy. I will have them linked in the description down below, so if you want to purchase this set for yourself, you are more than welcome to. Please go support small businesses. For me, I'd rather support small businesses if I can, and unfortunately for me, there's not a lot of places around me that locally that do handmade metallic watercolor. So of course I had to buy from another source. So I chose Etsy for this. I chose the Mr. B Watercolor Handmade with Love set. And what's a little bit different about this set in particular is it came with a palette of 42 watercolors. With this set, it didn't come with a brush, it didn't come with a palette, but it came with a multitude of more colors. There are more vibrant colors compared to the Derwent brand for 10 versus 42. That's a big, big difference. However, when it came down to pricing for this, I paid $61. They have, of course, did come with taxes, tariff fees, and all of that jazz. But for a set of 42s, I think $61 is actually not that bad, especially because I had more colors. They are much more vibrant than the ones from the Derwent brand. But I know that can be very off-putting, especially for newer or beginning artists who are just wanting to start out with watercolor. It can be very expensive. So for that, I'm going to say for price-wise, even though I got more for my money, even though I spent more, I spent a little over $30 more for this set of 42, I'm still going to give it about a 6 out of 10 for price. I appreciate that I had more colors to choose from, and I appreciate that it is handmade, and I understand that's why the price is a little bit higher, because when you're working with handmade products, they of course are going to be a little bit more expensive, but you can always find cheaper products. You do not have to buy a set as big as mine. The second thing that I wanted to talk about in regards to handmade versus store-bought brand is, what exactly are you getting? With the Derwent brand, the palette was just a little bit bigger than the one that I had. These were, I want to say, they were slightly big. They were a full pan versus the half pan size that I got with the Handmade. So for store-bought, I got a bigger pan, which if you didn't know, watercolors, they can either come in tubes or they come in pans. So for this one, I got a full pan versus my Handmade, which had a half pan, which were very, very tiny. So for that reason and stuff, I'm gonna give Derwent a little bit of a higher score for pan and product allowance and stuff. I'm gonna give them a little bit higher ranking. I'm gonna give them a 7 out of 10 for having a bigger palette. But with the Handmade, I think I'm going to give them about a 6 out of 10, even though these are half pans and stuff. You can always buy bigger pan sizes. For your watercolor, you do not have to do half pan like I did. It's just more colors, littler product. Now, one thing that I wanted to really test out with both of these products was how are they in comparison to a professional grade watercolor. Now, I have professional watercolors. I use Turner's watercolor set, and that is what I used in my comparison for this project. Now, Turner's watercolor, they're very, very pigmented, but the only difference between that and the two sets that I have in comparison for this project is the Turner's watercolor is actually in liquid. It comes in a tube, and those tubes are then squeezed out onto your palette, and then you have to use water to mix in with it to create your watercolor. Now, the pans that I have for this project, they are dry. So you actually have to add water to them. They are not in liquid form. You have to add water to them. So with that being said, in this test, in the first test that I actually did with this, how did they compare? I actually found that the Turner's watercolor, of course, was going to be a lot more vibrant and much more pigmented than my metallic watercolor. In this test, I compared my Derwent colors as well as my Handmade watercolors to my Turner's watercolor, and I found that the Turner's watercolor was far more pigmented than the Derwent and the Handmade watercolor. Now, the Handmade watercolor, even though I had a lot more colors to it, I did find that I sometimes struggled getting some of the pigment to stand out as much as it did. I'd actually have to layer it a little bit to actually get some of that pigment versus my Turner's watercolor, which I didn't have to use that much paint to actually get that bright vibrancy. So for this part of the challenge, I rated the Derwent a 6 out of 10 for vibrancy and color and stuff. It was very dull in comparison to my professional grade. And for my Handmade watercolor, I also gave it a 6 out of 10. Actually, I gave it a 5.5 out of 10 because I still had to layer on a lot of those colors. And I don't really want to have to do that whenever I'm working with my watercolor. I don't want to have to layer it multiple times. I want that pigment to actually stand out. The second test that I conducted with this was actually a colored pencil test. How would these colors work in comparison using a mixed media? Because I bought these palettes for a very specific project in mind that I am in the works right now. So with that being said, I wanted to test out which one would hold up better for a project using mixed media. If I was to combine watercolor and colored pencil, how would both of these work? So for the Derwent side, I actually found that the colored pencil did not want to blend. Now, the problem with the Derwent brand is because the colors are so limited, I found that I had a really hard time actually color matching my colored pencils to my Derwent colors. And the colors did not want to blend very well. Versus the Handmade. So when I put the Handmade down, because I had more colors to work from, I actually found it was much easier for me to pick a colored pencil that would blend very nicely into my watercolor. It's also well to note that the professional grade watercolor, it really did not want to take to that pencil versus my Handmade, which blended much nicer and actually took that colored pencil and helped blend it. It helped break it down, I want to say, a little bit, and it helped blend it simultaneously, and it also kept that metallic sheen as well. So for the Derwent side, I am giving them, unfortunately, I have to give them at least a 5 out of 10 for this, because if I'm working with a mixed media, I want to make sure that my colors are blending nicely with other existing colors that I have. So for Derwent, I gave it a 5 out of 10. For the Handmade watercolor, I'm gonna give them an 8 out of 10. I found it was much easier for me to color match, and I find that blending was actually much nicer, and I found that the pigment of the color actually helped break down that colored pencil a little bit and helped it blend out nicer while still keeping its metallic sheen. Speaking of metallic, now because I am doing a metallic watercolor challenge, of course, that metallic sheen for my paint is the most important. I found that Derwent's brand actually, the more pigmented that it became, the less metallic actually showed through. And for that, it was very disappointing, because as an artist, you know, you want your work to be pretty, you want it to shine through, especially if you're using a metallic paint. So for Derwent, unfortunately for me, even though it took less layers to get that pigment, I'm gonna rate this a solid 2 out of 10. It was very disappointing. It lost all that metallic sheen throughout whenever I was doing this. So for the Handmade one, I found that even though it took more layers, it took 3 layers to actually achieve the pigment that was showing on the pan. I actually found the more pigment that I added, the more metallic and shiny it became. So even though it took 3 layers to achieve this, that metallic sheen still shone through. So for that very reason, I'm gonna rate my Handmade much higher on the scale. I'm gonna give Handmade on this one a solid 8 out of 10. Even though it took more layers to achieve the same pigment and the same metallic sheen, I found the more I added, the more metallic and shiny it became. So for that, I'm going to give the Handmade a much higher score. Now let's talk about the project. The project I am working on is butterflies. I love butterflies. They are beautiful insects, and one of my favorite butterflies is actually this blue and black butterfly that I have seen around my area. So of course I really wanted to paint that. Now if you look very closely at butterfly wings, they are actually very shiny. So I figured using a metallic watercolor for this very challenge would actually help my butterfly stand out even more. So let's see how these two projects compare side by side. For this project, I decided to go in first with my professional grade Turner's watercolor paint to start off as my base layer. And I am using this on New York Central Art Supply 100% watercolor block paper for this project. I initially sketched out everything, and then I went in and I painted everything in a layer of my Turner's watercolor paint. After that was completed, I went back in with some of my colored pencils to give it more depth. The first one that I did was actually the Derwent side. So when I was going back and painting in the metallic for this project, I actually struggled a tiny bit with this one. The metallic paint did not really want to shine through no matter how many layers I added. Not only that, but because my palette was so limited with my colors, I actually found that I could not get the colors to match the Turner's watercolor as much as I liked. And because it didn't show up as shiny as I wanted to, you can actually see in later parts of this video that it's not shiny. I held it up into the light and it's not at all shiny. No matter how many layers I added, no matter what I did, tried to go in with details, I could not get it to look shiny. So for that, Derwent did not get a very high score on this. I'm gonna rate this one a 3 out of 10. The next part of this project was the Handmade. Now the Handmade watercolor did exponentially better with this project. As you can see in this project, it actually showed up much, much better than the Derwent brand. The Handmade watercolor also allowed me to get those realistic colors that match the Turner's watercolor brand pretty much on point. I was actually able to blend it very nicely with the Turner's watercolor as well as my colored pencil, making sure that it achieved a much darker area in much darker parts in some areas, and then in other parts much shinier and prettier. And I actually found that this worked out much better. So what are my final thoughts? Although Derwent is a name brand, I found that I actually like their pencils more than I do their watercolor set. For this, I would not recommend Derwent, just in all honesty. Even though it's a much cheaper and affordable option for some artists, I just did not like this at all. And it could just be I'm a bit biased because I am a small business myself, but I found that in every test that I tried with the Derwent brand, I actually didn't like it very much. I found it much harder to work with, and even though it came with its own water brush and stuff, I found that wasn't a plus because I have my own water brushes anyway. I have my own paint brushes anyway, so the brush really did nothing for this challenge. So Derwent, even though I love the brand for their colored pencils, I honestly could not recommend their watercolor, metallic watercolor for this very purpose. The colors were very limited. Even though you get a bigger pan size for this, I can't recommend them. I did not like them, just personally. Some people might like them. I didn't like it at all. For this challenge, I am deeming Handmade the winner. So that's it, y'all. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and enjoyed seeing the results at the end of this video. And I hope to see you all in the next episode. So if you liked this, or you want to see any of my other videos, check the description down below. If you are interested in purchasing any of the supplies that I have used today, I will also write them in the caption below this video. And I hope to see you all next time. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye, y'all.